Yep. Good morning, everyone. So last session we discussed about all the concept related to components, how we can access a component in another component, right? Yeah. So custom events is the example that we tried, and how to deal with custom events we learned. So custom events, already I showed one simple example. You practiced that, able to do that example. So output, input, all the properties. So these are all related to which concept? So events. These all related to events. So component related options. Now today we will see another important, that is Angular component life cycle hooks. Angular component lifecycle hooks. This is very important topic for interviews. Angular related interviews. Generally, so many questions are asked on this particular topic. One major concept is data binding. Another concept is this life cycle. In data binding, all concept will come. I told you that one way, two way bindings, style class bindings, event bindings. So questions in Angular in interviews mostly will be around these topics. So you must be very clear into major concepts. One is custom events. Another one is this component lifecycle hooks. Actually, what is component lifecycle hook? I will explain the point. Generally, Angular have a high level design. In the beginning of Angular, I explained you the overview of the flow of Angular application. In that flow, if you remembered, we discussed about uh, how application starts. There will be a file called main.ts. In that, there will be a bootstrap. Bootstrap indicates which module to start. By default, app module will start. We changed that, the flow we discussed. But you need to know another concept, generally how Angular application works. Actually, how the components are loaded, how the components work, one diagram I will show you. Means one request flow I will show here. Actually, so we have client. So we have the client, that is the user. So we are having this client. The client is user. The client, so that is user. When user makes a request, actually this is our Angular application. So we have our Angular application here. This is Angular app. In this application, you have some components like login, like register, like home. Some components are present. So Angular is a single page application. Angular starts with which page? Index.html. In that index.html, all these will come. Login, which one you need, that will come. That means we are not designing navigation from one page to another. Actually, what we are doing, we are having only one page and everything comes onto that page. you want login, you want register, everything comes onto that particular index page. That flow you will learn in a topic called routing. Later, when you learn routing, you will see that. Here, generally what happens is we have the component client makes a request. How this is going to work, I will tell you. Client makes a request. So this request usually comes to web server. Client makes a request. That request comes to web server. We call this web server as HTTP server. We call it as HTTP server. Web server or HTTP server. So whenever client wants anything, then automatically the request will be processed by this web server. Generally, you saw our Angular application is running in which port number? It is running on server. It is http://localhost. So 4200. It is running here. Now, what happens is in your application, how many components are there? Those components related information is maintained in a table. It is maintained in a table. That components information is maintained in a table. Table is nothing like, it is like index table. You see table of contents. Whenever you open a book, in that first you will have table of contents. Table of contents will tell which topic in which page. So that if you want to go to any particular topic, you can directly go to that particular page. Similarly, for Angular application also, there will be a table. That table contains information about which component is present and how it can be requested. That means what are the components present? It will have a information. So component we have login. Another component we have register. Another component we have home. How they are requested, that also defined here, like /login. This is requested /register. This is requested like /home. Actually, this is the path. That is the path. And this is the component. Which component to deliver on that particular request. This is a table which contains information about what are the components available and how we can request those components. This table is called as, route table. This table is called as route table. So in Angular, a route table contains information about what are the components available and how they can be requested. So that means when anyone wants to access your component, then for that, the route table is important. This route table contains information about what are available components and how they can be requested. Now, what happens here? Client makes a request. So client says that /login. After http://4200, he will use login. When client makes a request login, from where he will make a request? Usually request he will make from a browser. That means generally how the request will be. Login means not directly login. Usually request will be like http://localhost, what is it? 4200 slash in that login. Like this it will be. Now when client makes a request, this request will first come to, the request will come to web server. This web server actually contains, usually web server contains a HTTP processing pipeline. It contains a HTTP processing pipeline. Remember, this is present everywhere. Every web application have to work in the same way. Whether you may be using Java, .NET, PHP, Python, every web application, the basic request will first come to where? The request will come to web server. Web server is an HTTP server. The request will come to web server. This request will be processed on, request will be processed in a pipeline. We call HTTP processing pipeline. In that pipeline, who will process your request? Actually, your request is processed by HTTP handler. A HTTP handler is going to manage your request. Whatever the request you made, it will be processed by this handler. Handler is responsible for handling requests like get, post, put, delete. All such interactions are managed by HTTP handler. So you requested something, then the request will come to web server. That web server will process the request using a HTTP handler. What this HTTP handler will do is, it will first verify, is the request get, is the request post, like that. Get means what? Get means fetching information from server. Post means submitting information to server. You want to fetch information from server or you want to submit information to server. That is managed by this handler. Now this handler will make use of an engine. It will use an engine. We call this engine as routing engine. We call this engine as routing engine. What is the purpose of this routing engine is nothing but this routing engine is going to access your request and it will verify whether the requested path is available or not. That means you will make a request login. It will go to routing engine. Routing engine will connect with route table. Route table is present in Angular application. Now that route table, how to create, we will see next level. This routing engine will verify whether the particular requested path is available or not. If it is available, then what will happen? It will load this component. It will load this component into index. Understood? It will load the component into index. After loading the component, that means this will load the component. That component output will be sent to, the routing engine. This routing engine will send that output to handler. Handler will send that to home client. And if there is any problem in request, then this routing engine will use several requests, like it will return 200 status code. It will return 200 status code. 200 status code is used for success. 200 status codes will be there, 300 status codes will be there, 400 status codes will be there, 500 status codes will be there. Actually, we call them as status code. These are called as status codes. We call them as status code. Status codes are nothing but if you requested something and it is not available. If you requested something and it is not available, it will return 404. 404 means what? Not found. That is the request code. Remember, 200 request codes actually. 200 request code means, I will tell you the process here. 200 request code is nothing but it is related to success. That means your request is success, then it will give 200. It will have 200, 201, 202, 203 like that. That is for success. 300 codes are for redirection. Redirection means navigating from one place to another. That is 300. 300 means navigation. 400 means 400 is nothing but it is related to client side errors. Client side error means page you requested not found. The path you defined is not available. All such messages will come 400. Client side problems. Server side problems 500. Server not responding. Server is taking more time. So server is disconnected. All such messages are managed with which code? 500. So in web technologies, errors are managed by using these status codes. Errors we show by using these status codes. Now what happens here is you make a request. This request will come to web server. Web server will process that request using a HTTP handler. It will make use of a routing engine. This routing engine will take help of route table. It will verify whether the requested path is available in that application or not. If it is available, then it will load that component. And after that, it will deliver that component to you on screen so that you can see login. Now the question is, this is just flow. Now the question is, what is the lifespan of login? How much time that login will be there? What is the lifespan of that login? How it loads, how this login loads? What are the various phases of log? Actually, for example, you have a class. In object-oriented programming, we have a class. So in a class, what is the first phase? In order to access the members of a class, I want to access members of a class. What is the first phase? First phase is you have to create an object for that class. Who will create an object for that class? Who will create an object for that class? Who is responsible for creating an object for class? Question understood? A class is there. We have to access that members of the class. For that, we need to create an object. Who is responsible for creating object? In class, who? Constructor, na? Constructor, na? So constructor responsibility is to create an object. So what is the phase? Phase is creating object. Who is responsible for that? A method. Who is that method? Constructor. That means The phase name is creating object, and that phase is managed by a method. In Angular also same. In Angular, every component have several phases, and those phases are managed by methods. Those phases are managed by methods. Those are called as, we call those as life cycle hooks. Life cycle means what? From the time it started to the time it ends. Generally, when a component will end, there are two situations. A component usually ends once you finish the component and go to next. When you are moving from one component to another, the previous component is destroyed and the next component is loaded. Or the component will end when you close the application. When you close the application, component will end. So component has several phases between start to end. That means between start to end, so many phases will be there. Those phases are called life cycle hooks. That we will see now. What are those phases? When which action is performed, we will see. First important is see. This diagram I will upload. First, I will explain the process. First thing, what is the Angular application flow? In Angular application flow, first thing is client makes a request from browser. It will be like http:/localhost 4200/login. So the request will be processed in HTTP server. In HTTP server by using HTTP handler. By using HTTP handler inside HTTP, inside where HTTP processing pipeline. Inside HTTP processing pipeline. So client makes a request from browser. When client makes a request from browser, the request to be processed in HTTP server. Who will process? HTTP handler, where it will process in HTTP processing pipeline. It will process that. So after processing, what it will do is HTTP handler uses a routing engine. It uses a routing engine. HTTP handler uses a routing engine. What this routing engine will do? So routing engine gets the URL request and checks with home route table. Routing engine gets the URL request and it will verify. It will check with the home route table. What is route table? Route table is a virtual table which contains information about the components and their path, right? That means route table comprises of information about the request and component. Request and component. So if requested path is not matching, is not matching with route path in table, then it returns 404. 404 is what? Not found. It will return 404. There can be various requests actually. 200 request is for success. 300 request is for redirection. This is for redirection. Redirection navigating from one place to another. 400 request is for, this is client side error. It is so many are there. 400, 401, 402, 403 like that. So 500 codes are related to server side errors. These are major ones. 501, 502, 503. Is created. Component is created and loaded into page. Which page? Index.html. First component is created and it is loaded into page. That is the process how it actually works. Now, the component in Angular, will undergo. So you can say will undergo. So the component in Angular will undergo various phases from start to end. So which are known as, we call them as life cycle phases. We call them as life cycle phases. And very important, the life cycle phases are managed by various methods which are known as life cycle hooks. These are the hooks. So every component will undergo various phases from start to end. So we call them as life cycle phases. And these life cycle phases are controlled by some methods. We call those methods as what? Life cycle hooks. We call them as life cycle hooks. So component will have to handle several phases. I will show you the phases. What are the phases and what are the hooks? So up to this, I think everyone is clear. So one is how request is made, who will process that request, who will verify whether that requested path available or not, and if it is available, then what will happen. Now, in many interviews, this question is very much asked actually. So means for experienced people, this is important. The engine used for processing the request and response with route path. With route path is IV. IV is the name of engine. IV is the name of engine. The engine used for processing the request and response with route path is IV. IV is the engine name. Angular uses an engine called IV. IV is the engine name. Angular uses a compiler. What is Angular's compiler? Angular compiler. I told you Git, JIT compiler, AOT. Two techniques, na? Remember, right? So AOT is ahead of time. So the compilers used by Angular React, they use a compiler called Babel. Babel is the name of the compiler, but here we are not directly using JavaScript. Na? Babel is a JavaScript compiler. Here we are using which one? TypeScript. TypeScript is managed by which compiler? TypeScript is by which compiler? Two compilers are there in TypeScript architecture. Remember that? One is core compiler, another one is standalone. Standalone, we discussed that, right? Actually, this is our Angular project. Observe here. In Angular project, you can go to the file package.json. Package.json. In this package.json, you can see it is showing the libraries it is having. These are all the libraries we are having. Libraries will tell which version library you are using, what library you are using. So here you can see the version of library. Angular have a compiler. Na? Angular compiler library is there. Actually, suppose this is the compiler, Angular compiler library. Suppose you go to this library, where you can see this library file. This is the list of installed library, where you can see this library in node modules. In node modules, you can see all the libraries installed in node modules. So in node modules, you can see there is an Angular library. In this Angular, you can see compilers are there. So here, this is compiler. This is the compiler library. In this compiler library, this is the compiler library. And see, it is saying engines. Am I right? It is compiler is using engines. So every web application depends on these engines. It uses engines which are responsible for handling all these. And you can see it is using lot of engines. These you will understand in next level. I will explain them. Actually, you see these are all compiler engines. Now you can go into that engine and see what it is using. That is very complicated. As of now, we will not disturb that because we can do that later. At the end, I will show you one overview. So because by disturbing any point of engine will disturb entire project. If by mistake you done something in that engine process, then Angular application fails. That's the reason at the end I will tell you. And you see it is using a router. Remember? Just now I told you, na, it's using a router. This router is responsible for verifying whether your requested URL is present or not, right? This much you need not to explore. Just I am showing you the process, how actually it works. So in Angular JSON file, here you see it will mention about package JSON, Angular JSON. It will mention about the details of what are the files you are using, what are the folders you are using, what are the libraries for pictures, for CSS files, for scripts. It will show that information. Package JSON will show the libraries information. There you will find the library about compiler, which compiler it is using. Actually, Angular IE engine separate architecture is there. IE architecture. Angular IE architecture is there. Where is it? Right. So its architecture will be there. You don't need this actually. This is for people who are working at architectural level. You can see this is the view engine. In this view engine, you see the rendering engine. It is which engine? IE. So this is not required for you. Means at this level or even little bit experience level also, you don't need that. Very extreme experienced people, they need to know the architecture of this engine. That means you are showing 10 years experience. Then for such people, we expect this knowledge. That means for such people, we expect that they know the process of engine, how that engine works. Because if any technical issue comes, they can easily monitor that issue by knowing the engine errors. That means engine throws some errors that general people cannot easily understand. People who worked with that engine architecture, they know. So we don't need that. That's the reason for just same like, suppose you have a car mechanic. A car mechanic will do lot of mechanism. He can do lot of mechanism. He have a lot of experience. But if any engine problem comes and he need to control, for that only special people will be there. Everybody cannot do changes in the engine. Everybody cannot correct the problems in engine. Everybody can do other type of problem solving. But engine, only specialized people will be there. Even for a bike engine also. That means you go to a bike mechanic and say my engine have a problem. Then he will tell that we will show it to engine specialists. There will be an engine specialist who is specialized in handling that engine. Software also, so many engines will be working. Routing engine, rendering engine, view engines. In experience level, they will ask these questions. What is the role of routing engine? Routing engine role is verifying whether requested path is correctly matching or not. What is the role of rendering engine? Rendering engine is responsible for processing your request. What is the role of view engine? View engine responsibility is to generate output and display. The output that you see, that is managed by which engine? View. On screen, whatever you see. I told you MVC na? In MVC architecture, view represents UI. The final view output is generated by which engine? View engine. The processing will be done by which engine? Rendering. Request will be processed by which engine? Routing. So many engines are working in your Angular. So that much in depth, I am not going. We're not required also. As of now, just the basic flow you need to understand. Okay. So this is understandable to everyone, right? You make a request will go to web server, that will be processed by handler. Using a routing engine, it will verify. Once routing engine finds the path, it will load the component. Now in that component, what are the phases? You may ask like, why do I need to learn these phases? You need to learn these phases to understand the issues happening in the component. If component is not responding fast, if component is delayed in output, If component is not responding, then we need to know where the problem occurred. That we can track by using these events. These events are very important to understand where the problem occurred. For example, I will tell you the flow basic. Suppose you made an order of food on Swiggy, Zomato. You made an order in Swiggy for food. Now it is taking long, it is taking more time to deliver you. Where it is slow? You ordered food and it is very much delayed. Your food is not delivered, it is taking time. Where it may take time? So many phases are there. So many phases are there. First phase, you made an order. When you made an order, the restaurant have to confirm your order. That means it may take time in confirming your order. So delay is in confirming order. Understood? Restaurant confirmed the order and it start preparing the order. Delay may be in preparing the order. Restaurant preparing the order and Swiggy is unable to find a delivery partner for you. Am I right? That means delay is in finding delivery partner. Now delivery partner found. So, and he went to restaurant, but restaurant haven't finished preparing your order. That means now the problem is in restaurant side. And restaurant prepared, finished your order. Delivery partner picked up your order, but is not reaching you. That means there may be delay in traffic or something. That means if anybody asks where your application failed, why it is slow, why it is not working, where it is slow, you need to track every phase. That means you cannot simply say it is slow. You need to know where it is slow, why it is slow. All those things can be done if we know the phases. We know the phases. So those phases are called as what? Life cycle hooks. And what are the life cycle hooks? I will show you here. The basic life cycle hooks, various phases of life cycle hooks here. Let me show you the flow first. A basic architectural flow I will show you. A small presentation is there. I will check. Right. So the basic flow of the presentation, this is phases are same. These are the versions. Let me see. Yeah. You can see actually the life cycle hooks. This is the engine. These are IV engine. Scroll down. Yeah. Yeah. So these are the life cycle phases. These are the basic life cycle hooks in order. That means every component will have these methods. Internally, these phases are working. One by one, we will explore them. We will see what are these phases. Internally, these phases are working. Now, let's see what are these phases, how these hooks will work. Remember, before these phases will start, actually, before these phases, there will be an option that is constructor. Understood? What is the purpose of constructor? It will create an object for component. For component, it will create an object. After component is created, now these phases will start. These phases will start. So one by one, that is the order of the phases. I will explain detailedly. See, what is the first phase here? So every component life cycle. So the life cycle hooks, the life cycle hooks comprises of following methods. Life cycle hooks comprises of methods. The first important method is ng on changes. The first method is ng on changes. The first method is ng on changes. ng on changes. What happens in this method, I will tell you. What happens in this phase? This is the first phase. What happens in this phase? What are the activities performed in this phase? Actually, it is the first phase that starts after the component object is created. After the component object is created, this is the first phase. That means if anybody asks what is the first phase of life cycle, the first phase of life cycle is ng on changes. ng on changes. Now, what happens in this phase? First point, in this phase, memory is allocated for references. Memory is allocated for references in component. The memory is allocated for references in component. Memory is allocated for references in component. That means here, suppose you declared public some name, it is what type? String. That means now what it have to do? It should allocate memory. It should allocate memory for which property? Name. So the memory is allocated for the references in component. That means in the component you have references, and for those references first memory is allocated. After allocating memory, next point, values are initialized. Values are initialized into memory. Values are initialized into memory. That means the initialization of values also happens in this phase only. Values are initialized means we have public, name, and some value. Now, this is very tricky question in interviews actually. The tricky question is nothing but, so we will show this line and we will ask that, is any change occurred in name? Is any change occurred in name? Because this comes under, that means this is referred as change detection. This is referred as change detection. This is very, very important technical word. Now, tell me, in this line, we initialized a value into a property, and we are saying that this comes under change detection. Change detection means some change happened in the value. Some change happened in that reference. What change happened there? What change happened? Why it comes under change detection? Why initializing comes under change detection? Why initializing comes under change detection? Here we are not changing any value na. For example, John is changed with some David, then change. We are not changing anything na. Then why it comes under change detection? Why it comes under change detection? Because before this John is initialized into name, what is name? Name type is string, but what value it is having? It is having undefined. Understood? That means it is having undefined. Once you put some value, that undefined is changed with this value. Na? That is the reason this is change. Many people are confused. Why this is changed? I am just initializing one value. I am just initializing a value, and why it comes under change detection? Because before the value goes into the memory, what is that memory having? Undefined. Undefined is changed to name. Undefined is changed to John. That means before the change, it is undefined. After the change, this is John. That is the reason initialization of value into memory. This comes under which category? Change detection. NG on changes. NG on changes. That means first memory is allocated, values are initialized. Values are initialized into that memory. These two basic things comes under change detection, right? Next important, another one is this is change detection happening. After that, you have initialized the value. After initializing the value, after initialization of the value, now what happens is, so the values are binded, the values are binded to UI. The values are binded to UI. They are binded to UI. How you bind values to UI? By using which techniques? By using which techniques? Interpolation. Am I right? By using interpolation, by using property binding, and by using attribute binding. So all these comes under change detection. All this comes under change detection. That means binding these values to the UI. You assigned some value and you are binding the value. Binding the values to UI. This comes under which one? Change detection. That means in interviews they ask, so what are the activities happens in change detection? The activities happen in change detection. Initialization. Initialization also change detection. Property binding, attribute binding, another one, interpolation. Interpolation. Not only that, identifying the changes. Not only that, that means the changes in UI are identified and updated to the data source. This is managed by using event binding. This also comes under which one? Change detection. That means the values are binded to UI. Whatever changes you are making in the UI, they are updated back. That means event binding. Because you know that event binding handles two-way, na? Two-way. That means even you write like this. So NG model that is going to manage two-way binding. It contains property binding and event binding. Na? Square brace refers to So property binding, parenthesis refers to event binding. That means change detection is the major phase in Angular lifecycle. Angular component lifecycle starts with ng on changes, initializing, assigning the memory, initializing values into memory, binding those values to UI, identifying the changes and updating back. All this comes under change detection. This all comes under change detection. So remember, questions may be asked in different ways in the same concept. They may ask like, property binding comes under which phase? Property binding comes under which phase? ng on changes. Event binding comes on which phase? ng on changes. Initializing values comes under which phase? ng on changes. Why initializing value comes under ng on changes? Because before the value is assigned, it is undefined. In many interviews, they ask who is identifying the changes. Who is identifying these changes and who is managing? I told you about ng model, if you remember. So actually, the changes are detected. The changes are detected and managed by simple changes object. By simple changes object. So the changes are detected and managed by simple changes object. There is an object called simple changes. This simple changes object is a member of, so object which is a member, it is a member of ng on changes. It is a member of ng on changes. Actually, it is a member of on changes, not ng on changes. It is a member of on changes. Member of on changes. Actually, simple changes object provides an algorithm with two values. What is the algorithm with two values? Algorithm with two values. One is previous value. Previous value is equal to current value. If previous value is equal to current value, then it means no change detected. No change detected. If previous value is not equal to current value. If previous value is not equal to current value, then change detected. This is the matrix it uses. This is the algorithm it uses. That means who is responsible for identifying the changes? Simple changes object. How it will identify the changes? By using two properties. Current value, previous value. So current value and previous value both are same. That means you see, this is the matrix actually it uses. For example, suppose public name is a string type. Now, what is the previous value? Previous, here I will tell you. Again, we have defined. So, and here we will put equal to some John. Now, what is the point here is previous value. Previous value is what? Name is equal to undefined. Undefined. Name is equal to undefined. Current value is what? Name is equal to John. That means, so previous value is not equal to current value. That means change detected. Am I right? That is change detected. This practically, I will show you how this practically tested. We can test it practically. So that is ng on changes. So lot of activities are performed on ng on changes. That is the reason it is the key concept in interviews. So change detection. What is change detection in Angular? What are the activities performed in change detection? And why they are under change detection? These all questions are important. And who manages change detection? So this is important. Let's see here. Suppose I will just show you one point. Suppose any component I will take here. Actually, you see, suppose we will go to any component. In the component, we will use the TypeScript file. This is the class. Class is some parent component. This class is having, so on implements, it implements what? On changes. So it implements on changes. It implements on changes. That is nothing but it is implementing on changes means, so we have to implement. So on changes, this is, yeah. So on changes we have to define. And on changes actually managed by a method called what? Ng on changes. You see, it is using simple changes. This ng on changes is depending on simple changes. And that simple changes object, let's go to definition. Right click, go to definition. You go to definition, this simple changes object, you can see it is coming from which one? Simple change class. It is a custom type. It is simple change class. Right click on simple change class, go to definition. Simple change is having previous value, current value. It is also having first change. Now this is previous value, current value. If previous value and current value are matching, it will identify that no change occurred. If previous value is not matching with current value, it will identify that change occurred. Then it will automatically update. So actually all this we have to write in JavaScript jQuery. But what is advantage of Angular? It is internally written and given to you in the form of a library. That is why Angular is a framework. Framework means everything is built. You have to just use those built-in features. So you don't need to write everything. Actually, to identify whether the change occurred or not, we have to write a logic manual. This is internally written, you just use it. That means you implement ng on changes, it will do it. I will show you how to detect the changes and all, I will tell you. But initially, this is important to understand. These all points are very important related to ng on changes. So ng on changes, this is the first phase. Am I right? So I hope you got a clarity on this. I will show example also on this, how this changes works, how it detects, I will tell you. So tell me, what are the activities performed on ng on changes? Allocating memory for references, initializing value, property binding, attribute binding, event binding, event style class binding. Understood? So, and event binding, and but not custom events. But not custom events. Event binding is only internal events. That means on change, on click, only these. custom events are not handled here. They are managed by another, because custom events are not internal events. These are the events written by you. Those events are not managed here. That means here better we say all the events, event binding will happen. So here a simple point is event binding, and here not custom events. Not custom events. Custom events will happen in another phase. Those will happen in another phase, right? It is not custom events. Then what are the other events? Click, change, key up, blur, focus, all this comes under that. This is the first phase of life cycle. Now, in this, we have other phases here. Other phases: on, init, do, check. So init, check, all so many options are there. That we'll see in next session. Tomorrow we will finish. Okay, tomorrow we will have a complete overview on all the phases. Today we learned only one phase, that is ng on changes. Then net other phases we will see in tomorrow's session, right? Then I will give you one small example on that, right? Then we will go into other concepts, services, pipes, how to handle them. Okay, right.